Welcome. Very happy to have you here today. This is the fourth installment of the new ASMP Town Hall series, Creative Focus. We're able to hold this series thanks to the support of PetaPixel. So we definitely want to thank them as we move forward. What we want these town halls to be are a place where we can catch you up on some of the most recent news, advocacy related news, the stuff that ASMP and NAMPA are doing, some celebrations when exciting things happen, some things to watch out for. And in fact, just this morning, I was on one of our Tuesday morning legal clinic calls. If you don't know, over at ASMP, if you're a member, you can sign up for a 15-minute one-on-one session every Tuesday morning with one of our attorneys. Often it's me. And so this morning I was talking with a member who said, "Hey, I have an issue with the state labor board. And they're asking me questions about contractors versus employees." And I said, "Well, you're in luck because we actually just did a whole program on that. And that was Creative Focus number 3 on independent contractors and employees." And it reminded me how that is the point of these sessions. We want to do things that are relevant and helpful and help you in your careers and help you in your businesses and are timely and topical. And so while it not might not be, the most interesting topic, independent contractors and employees is an important one. And I was reminded of that this morning. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and we're going to jump in. And for the first 15, 20 minutes, going to go over a few things that have been happening in the world that we want to definitely talk about. So here we go. And hopefully everyone can see that. If for some reason you can't, throw it in chat and let me know that, hey, things are not looking the way they need to look. All right. So we're excited to have Honore Brown here, senior photo editor from Wonderful Machine. And we're going to be talking all about portfolio reviews, how to make the most of your portfolio review, what you need to do to prepare, what you need to do afterwards, how to choose the images that you want to display there. Very excited about that. But first, if you have missed any of the town halls, and as I mentioned, this is the fourth one, you can go over to our YouTube channel. And we'll be putting some links in the chat throughout the day here so that you can go to and see some of the resources that we're talking about. But you can go to our YouTube channel and see those previous town halls. Definitely worth checking out. Want to do a few updates and reports on a few topics. There's so much happening right now. Normally summers die down a little bit, but not this summer. There's a lot going on. And so we want to talk about the comments to the Copyright Office NOI, or Notice of Inquiry, that we mentioned at the last town hall that we submitted the other day, and show you something that was very interesting to me, kind of blew my mind. And we'll look at that in a second. Want to talk about our amicus brief in Sedlik versus Kat Von D. That was due today, and we just filed it within the last, I think, 30, 45 minutes. And I'm going to give you a link where you can go and read that brief if you have interest in that. And then there were 2 Supreme Court cases earlier in the week, Trump versus Cook and Trump versus Slaughter. There were also many other Supreme Court cases, but they don't have to deal with copyright. Obviously, some really big cases came out this week on a number of different issues across the country. But we're going to be talking about these 2 because they have a direct impact on the Copyright Office. So last time we met, we were talking about comments that were due on the Copyright Office NOI, Notice of Inquiry, on alternative fee structures. This is something that we've been really focused on for a long time. And what we were talking about there is the Copyright Office said, "Hey, we want to get your opinion, world, about things like subscription fees and different ways you can make that happen." And so we work a lot with the Copyright Alliance, and the Copyright Alliance submitted some great comments that we supported and said, "Hey, we endorse these comments." But we also submitted our own. And these comments were primarily drafted by myself and Sean Fitzgerald. Sean, former president of NAMPA, attorney as well. And but here's what blew my mind: that when this notice of inquiry went out, the comments were due. And just a few days ago, the Federal Register, where all these comments are compiled, listed the number of comments they received. And if you look in this inset here, they received 100,046 comments on this issue. I have not seen a copyright issue. I mean, some big, social type issues will get hundreds of thousands of comments. This is a copyright issue on alternative fee structures. I got 100,000 comments. That blew my mind. That is crazy. And all these comments are posted online, but they started with just 45 comments that were posted online. And our comments were one of those 45 that were posted online, along with the other biggest players like the Copyright Alliance and our friends over at NPPA and others. And so wanted to definitely highlight that because I thought that was incredibly interesting, the number of comments that were sent in. And then if you want to read our comments, I am putting in the chat right now links to both the Copyright Office comments portal, where you can read all the comments from other people, and then a direct link to the comments that we wrote over on the ASMP website. So you can see the issues and the way that we approach some of these things. If you have interest in reading things like this, which let me tell you, you may not, and that's okay too. All right. Now, oh, got too excited there. So last time I was in Washington, while I was there, while we were in meetings, the news came down, and this was on June 9th, actually. And the news came down that in the case of Sedlik versus Kat Von D, which is the case of a photographer, Jeff Sedlik, who many of you all may know, and a longtime ASMP member and friend, sued Kat Von D, the famous tattoo artist, for copyright infringement related to this image that you see here in an article on PetaPixel that I drafted for them, of the photograph of Jeff's on the left and the tattoo on the right. And the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the circuit on which this case is being held, very rarely issues an order, what's called en banc, which means all the judges from that circuit are going to sit and listen to this case. That's a lot of them. That's like a dozen or more judges that are going to opine on this. And it's kind of like the next step of appeals, but it's incredibly rare. I think in a recent year, only 20 cases were granted this. And so when we saw that this case, which ASMP has been involved in for quite a while, was granted en banc review, we got very excited. I spoke with Jeff that night, and that turned into this article, and we'll put a link to the article in there, and also a link to the brief that was filed in the last 30 minutes. And so you can look in the chat for that. The reason we're excited is because it gives the full panel for the Ninth Circuit a chance to remedy an issue that has long been something we've been concerned about. It's the way that copyright infringement is tested in the Ninth Circuit, which is the group of courts that are on the West Coast. And they have this test over there that's unique to them. It's called the intrinsic extrinsic test. It needs a lot of work. And that's what this brief was about. This brief was about the intrinsic and extrinsic test, how it applies to this case, and why it matters. So if you have some questions and want, again, to read some dense legal jargon, we wrote this with our friends over at APA and attorney Steve Doniger, and our friends at NPPA, especially Alicia Calzada and Mickey Ostriker, their general counsel and deputy general counsel. They are often writing partners of ours, and so we were happy to share this brief with them. Love for you to read it. As I mentioned, this was just filed with the court in the last 30 minutes, and it was due today. So you can go and read that. Much more on this case as we move forward. The hearing will be held in September, and so we'll be looking towards that date for how the case goes and how the arguments go. Certainly, happy to answer any questions about these things when we get to the Q&A a little bit later on today. Now, I did mention that there were two Supreme Court cases going on here. And let's see here. Sorry, get all my windows in a row. There are two Supreme Court cases that are going on that were decided this week. The reason we're talking about them is that these two Supreme Court cases directly impact the copyright office. One was Trump versus Cook. And Trump versus Cook was a case where the administration had fired the head of the Federal Reserve, Lisa Cook. Cook sued and said, "You can't fire me," and there's some back and forth, or not the head of, but a governor of the Federal Reserve. And the case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And what this case is about the limits of executive power when it comes to removing the heads of agencies or people involved in agencies that are independent agencies. And the Federal Reserve holds a special place in our system that is not only considered an independent agency, but a historically significant independent agency. And so the court found in favor of Cook and said the president can't remove someone in this type of agency. But the opinion was very constrained to the fact that it was the Federal Reserve. And so most people who've read this opinion believe that this is not going to really be broadly applicable to others. And a good example of that was Trump versus Slaughter, which also came out the same day. And in Trump versus Slaughter, the head of the FTC was removed by the administration, also sued. And the court held that the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, is an executive agency purely, even if it has some level of independence. The who is in charge of it is appointed by the president, and the president can remove that person, and that is just fine. So in Trump versus Cook, the court found on the side of Cook, and in Trump versus Slaughter, the court found on the side of the administration. So the question is, what type of agency the Copyright Office is? Because if some of you all remember, and you can go back and look at videos on this that we did, I think the very first one we talked about this. The Register of Copyrights, Shira Perlmutter, was removed from her position by President Trump. She sued, got an injunction, was returned back to her position, and filed a lawsuit in the same vein as these lawsuits. That lawsuit continues to work its way through the court. Just today, the administration filed essentially an appeal to stop the injunction preventing them from firing Shira, Register Perlmutter, and that was denied. So she is still the Register of the U.S. Copyright Office as of this moment. That could change as of any moment. This is a lot of uncertainty. This is not an area of law that is my expertise, but I will say this. Reading the Supreme Court briefs, it is far more likely that the U.S. Copyright Office is closer to the Trump versus Slaughter case, which would give the president the right to remove the Register of Copyrights. That would not be a positive development, in my opinion, for a number of different reasons. However, we are waiting to hear what the courts have to say about this. The two cases that came out give us a little bit of guidance, but not necessarily a lot of positive hope, I might say. Nothing clearly negative yet, but we are keeping our eyes peeled. So we are definitely staying on top of that. Just the other day, we announced the winners of the ASMP Best of 2026 competition, and wanted to take a moment to congratulate all those winners who submitted such amazing work. Our Best in Show winner was Keely Yuan with the Guardians of Life series, which is actually just truly stunning, and it is worth you going to check out. Oh, I'm putting the cases for Trump versus Cook and Trump versus Slaughter in the chat. And I'm also putting Best of Winners Gallery in the chat, so you can go and check it out. Because I encourage you to go check it out, I'm going to go ahead and share a different screen here. And so you can go over to ASMP, and if you go under Events and Best of, you can see the Winners Gallery here. Up here in the upper right is a video where the judges, including Darius Himes, the head of international photography at Christie's, and Mary Virginia Swanson, and Kat Gallagher, all got together to talk about why the winning images won. Definitely worth watching. And we'll put a direct link to that Best of 2026 winners announcement in the chat as well. But then if you go down this page, you can see all of the amazing winners in the 15 categories. Really stunning and beautiful work all the way through. It reminds me, not that I need reminding, but it's a great reminder of how exceptional the work that members do across the organization. I'm very impressed with so many of these images. I encourage you to go check them out. Congratulations again to all of the winners for their work and for bringing us this beautiful, beautiful imagery. So you'll stop sharing that and go back to sharing this. Okay. Oh, once again, got excited. So now we're going to talk about portfolio reviews. And we are thrilled to have Honore Brown here from Wonderful Machine for a conversation about some of the most important elements of portfolio reviews and how you can make the most of a portfolio review. We have some questions that you all submitted when you joined, when you registered for the session. But please remember, use that Q&A box. Use that Q&A box to ask questions and follow-up questions on things that we talk about. We're also going to have some time at the end of the session today, as we always do, to answer questions about anything we talked about, anything we didn't talk about on the advocacy side, on the business side, photography side, industry stuff, portfolio reviews, and more. Without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Honore to this town hall. And Honore, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do and what you do at Wonderful Machine?
Thank you. Thanks everybody for joining us. My name's Honore Brown. I'm a senior photo editor at Wonderful Machine, and I've been there for a long time. Previously was a photo editor at The New Yorker, and before that, a studio manager for Max Fiducal, who was sort of fashion celebrity photographer. So I've had sort of a broad and diverse background in photography and supporting photographers and seen a lot of change in the industry over the years. And I'm excited to talk to you guys about portfolio reviews and specifically, how to get the most out of the experience of having a reviewer and, how to prepare, all that good stuff.
Well, welcome. We're happy to have you. And why don't we start by kind of setting the stage? I think so many photographers are inundated with the advertisements for portfolio reviews, and these range from very hyper local type reviews with local magazines and newspapers and companies, all the way up to global reviews with people from all over the world. So why would a photographer, no matter what level they're at, take the time and spend their money, which sometimes can be very pricey, on a portfolio review? What's the point? What do you get out of it?
Yeah. It's a great question. And there are a lot, I'm sure not all portfolio reviews are alike. So, doing some research and sort of trying to choose wisely in which reviews you participate in. But generally speaking, I'm a big believer that the process of speaking about your work and formally presenting your work will support you bringing a lot more focus to your ability to have an elevator pitch and to speak fluidly to clients and to pitch ideas and to build an enormous amount of confidence. I think that's just an essential part of it, as well as getting feedback, good and bad, and the bad being as helpful as the good. Photographers, a lot of them, almost all of them work alone, so it's just an incredible opportunity to talk about your work and get feedback and to push yourself to have a formal presentation and elevator pitch and way to sort of articulate who it is that you are and what it is that you do, visually and in words.
I want to pick up on that for a second because I think, so many people just think of portfolio reviews as here are my images, talk to me about the images, but it's more than that, right? It's an opportunity to talk about you and the type of work you do and the type of things that motivate you from an artistic standpoint. And if you haven't taken the time to edit that down in the same way that you do your photographs, you're going to be all over the place. How important is it when you sit down with a new reviewer that you're able to talk about you and the work that you want to be doing?
I think it's essential. And I think it's hard, and I think it takes time to get really good at that. So I think that's a huge part of what portfolio reviews offer is an opportunity to really flex those muscles and to build that skill set so that it becomes something that is very second nature to you, once you're actually having those sort of client meetings and engaged with pitching story ideas or projects, that it's an opportunity for you to have a conversation about your work with industry professionals who are there because they want to help and who are really going to give you candid, honest feedback. And so I think that's, if you put in the work to be prepared and come with questions, it's just something you could get so much out of.
Sorry, you cut out for a second. I hope you
Oh,
can hear
okay.
me. No,
Yes, I hear you.
that was on okay, good. That was on my side, I think.
Oh, okay. Always
Um,
here.
you mentioned candid feedback, and it
Mhm.
it makes me think of there are people in your life that I think are cheerleaders for the work that you do. Back when I was a photographer, I remember I don't know that I ever took a picture that my mother didn't think was like the greatest picture that anyone's ever taken. And that's not helpful, is it? You need that kind of feedback that says, hey, even though you may love this for whatever reason, it's not the strongest work, and here's why. Is that a valuable part of a review?
Absolutely. It's probably among the most valuable parts of the review. And I would say don't be afraid to ask what's not working or what am I missing? Or, do you think this is strong enough to go put out there in like a marketing effort? I think that you really sometimes it's hard to know without asking professionals, who are looking at lots of work all the time, sort of where you are situated in your photo market. And if you are really ready to put yourself out there and try and get your work in front of people, or whether you have work to do on shooting personal work, editing your website, really developing your brand, and to get a real sense of what the next steps are for you to kind of, if there are things about your presentation that aren't working, what do you need to do? What are the next steps?
Well, let's get specific on a few things here and
Okay.
say, okay, so I signed up for a portfolio review. What should I be doing before the review to get prepared for that?
I think one thing a lot of photographers don't do that would be very helpful is take the time to, once you get the list of who the reviewers are that you're paired with, to do some quick research to get a sense of who those individuals are, what are their backgrounds, try and think about, if they're coming from editorial background, commercial, fine art, and sort of what their area of expertise is, and then to come with questions specifically for those folks. And it's okay if it's sort of the same question for everyone about your work. Again, like have a really good idea of the conversation you hope to have, and then shape and curate the work to drive that conversation.
I want to come back to that point because you
Okay.
mentioned that earlier when we were talking, and it stuck with me. But before we get there, we've talked a couple times about questions to ask. Do you have some examples of some questions that you think would be effective for,
Mhm.
a photographer to be asking a reviewer?
Yeah, I mean, and this somewhat depends on whether you're looking for general feedback on your website, your portfolio, your brand, or whether you have a specific project that you've brought that you're maybe it's in development or maybe you're in the process of editing it. So it might be a little different depending on whether you're looking for specific feedback on a specific series of images or general feedback on like, is this working kind of in the way that you're putting your work out there? But some good questions are, if there's particular places you think the work might be weaker, you can draw a question. Do you think this work is edited in a way that's cohesive? That might be. Do you get a sense of my style based on the way I'm putting my work out there? And does it seem consistent to you? Does this work seem commercially viable? If that's your goal, like to then try and get commissions. So those might be some good questions as starting points. Tom, sorry, you're frozen for me. I'm not sure if everybody can hear me.
Back.
Oh, sorry. Back. Yes, sorry, just froze
Okay,
for a second
good.
there.
Internet. Look, it's too hot in Dallas. The internet's just
Oh
stuck.
gosh.
That's
Yeah.
that's the plan. Um, no, what I was asking is, I think some of those questions go to helping develop a body of work, right? And choosing your work that goes into what you present. I mean, I know some photographers we hear from reviewers, it's like it's the greatest hits of the last 10 years that they bring to
Yeah.
review, but that's not the most effective always, is it? What should photographers be thinking about when they're choosing a body of work to bring to a review?
I think that work that is recent and that is strongly thematic or that comes together in some kind of cohesive way, it's okay if it's a shorter series. Often, my experience with reviews is that we'll look at the website just to kind of get a big picture sense of what a photographer is generally up to or generally sort of their areas of expertise. And then supplementally, there would be a series that's much more specific and it could be personal. It's often some of the best conversations I have with photographers and some of the strongest work I see in these reviews are personal projects. So don't be afraid to bring work that's personal. Don't be afraid to bring work that is potentially still being developed unless you don't have enough, you're not far enough along to sort of pull together a cohesive series of images. But recent and personal are great places to start. It's okay if it's a commission, if you've done something. But typically, the more you can express in the images you share, your perspective, your style, your creative point of view, I think it will help those reviewers then provide feedback for how you can continue to shape and express your unique style to others. Sorry, Tom.
How many images should some can you hear me now?
I can hear you
You
now.
heard that?
Just a bit of a lag.
Okay. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
We're for those of you in attendance, we'll edit this in a way that you'll never even notice. It's going to be so great. So, how many images should someone bring? We might look at the website, might look at some of those recent works, but is it? You mentioned you can just bring a few. Is less more here? What are you? What are? How many images is most effective?
It's a great question. So, these reviews on average are usually 20-minute sessions. That's sort of the average. 20 minutes is going to go by really, really quickly. So it doesn't need to be very long. Generally, like 15 to 30, somewhere in there is a great number. And it's really up to the individual photographer. If you don't have a specific project, it could be just a sequence of images that is edited together in such a way that it is almost like a mini portfolio. For a lot of photographers these days, their overview kind of landing page edit on their website sort of functions in that way. But like I said, I think the more specific you can be with your images in the way that you're curating and putting things together, and the more specific you can be in the questions you come with and the feedback that you're seeking, I think just the richer of a conversation you'll have because 20 minutes really is not a lot of time when it comes down to it.
What I want people to put questions in the Q&A. Please do so that we can get those answered. But one question that came in when someone signed up was, what's more important these days? A website, your Instagram, a printed portfolio? What's the most effective thing you can do?
So the portfolio books, like the bound, sort of formal, beautifully printed books, I see less of these days. I think that they are still important. And for photographers who are having a lot of in person meetings with clients, it's just an incredibly impressive way to present your work. But I don't think there's the same expectation anymore that everyone needs to keep, have, and maintain in an up to date way a formal book. And a lot of events have moved online. So I think that digital presentation tools are, for most portfolio events, unless it's sort of stated elsewhere, are fine. That being said, I think what books used to sort of force photographers to do is to sort of put together very formal, thoughtful, intentional sequences of images, and to edit, really, to think about like, I only have so many pages. This is really expensive. What are the images that I are, sort of important for me to share, and then put them together literally page by page in such a way that there's a flow and a beginning, middle, and end. And so I think that photographers should really work to have that same sort of discipline and intention in whatever digital medium you may be using to share your work online. Instagram's a little different. Instagram, I feel like, is, an important space to be active for your marketing, of your brand. But like in terms of a portfolio meeting, I think it's really important to have something that's got a little bit more of a sequential flow to it, and a little bit more of a formal, not that it could be a web gallery, I think that's fine. But I think you want to be able to see images sequentially large, and you want, as a photographer, to be able to kind of move through the images not super quickly. You want to kind of make sure that the person that may be encountering your work for the first time really has enough time to sort of like think about each individual image and not just sort of scroll. We do enough of that, but we do
Yeah.
enough of that. So you're looking for a tightly curated sequence of images. Could be like a web gallery, could be a PDF. There's even like some virtual kind of flip book virtual portfolios. Some people do um, movies. That's a little harder if it's some kind of motion piece, because the stop pausing to have questions and conversation could be a
Yeah.
little tricky.
I think that last point's really important. You want to make this easy on the reviewer, right? Because that's going to give you as much time and get as much feedback as possible. Can you talk a little bit about what you see with photographers at any level when it comes to editing their own work, or tips or tricks or things that, just in not even developing a body of work, but just the editing process? What do you see over and over again?
Like things they need to work on.
Yeah.
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 I mean, I think what's hard for photographers, the biggest challenge seems to be letting certain things go. They might have a favorite image and they'll carry it with them and try and get it into every edit because it's one of their favorites. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't, older work tends to be something that's not going to serve you best in terms of, especially this sort of platform, like a portfolio review. And so I think it's probably just in general, photographers, when they don't put a lot of energy into editing their work, things feel broad and diffuse rather than specific and cohesive and sequential. They, it seems like they just tend to start a web gallery, or a web page, and or your Instagram feed, and it just kind of like organically is growing over time, and maybe is more reflective of, if you're hired to do work, what your most recent jobs were, rather than really taking the time to sort of step back and assess what best communicates your style, your point of view, your perspective and creative voice. I think that's more important to see than to see like what your latest jobs were, for,
Right.
in most cases.
Well, and you talk about style and creative voice, and that goes back to one of the first things we mentioned, which is you as a photographer, certainly if you're looking to advance in your career or get hired, you're more than your images. You need to be able to sell yourself as a creative, as an artist, as a photographer. So that includes the words and that includes the demeanor and the way you approach these. Do you think that at these large scale type portfolio review events, photographers can reasonably think about getting hired?
Potentially, it tends to be, I think, more absolutely that you could make that kind of connection. But I would say if you're making the investment, know that there's immense value in it beyond whether you get hired. I mean, that could certainly happen. Like with all things in the photo industry and, getting hired to make work, it's relationship building too and building your reputation. So that's something that I think it's a great networking opportunity. But I really do feel like the true value is in the feedback and is in the conversations you're going to have, the honest conversations you're going to have. And that if you come with specific questions, you'll hear maybe 6, 7, 8 different people's responses to those questions. So that's just incredibly valuable. And it's sort of a unique place where you can have that experience as a photographer, I think.
So we were talking earlier about maybe instead of the old printed portfolios that cost an arm and a leg, maybe now you do something smaller marketing piece, a leave behind, or even a small book. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, as I mentioned, maintaining a book is quite expensive and time consuming. So when we're working with photographers at Wonderful Machine, a lot of what we're talking about as sort of a next step for a printed asset is like a beautifully sequenced, maybe like little magazine leave behind or a print promo piece, something that I think there's still a lot of value in having printed work and something physical that people can actually handle and or that you can leave with people. But I think, there's other opportunities to have even printed books that are, more like a blurb kind of book rather than for anyone who's not familiar with the large Epson prints, bound with an embossed cover, which again is incredible. And if you have the opportunity to have such a book and maintain it and have meetings, it's an incredibly impressive way to see work. But just to realize that there's so many other printed formats that you can easily and relatively affordably produce and distribute for yourself that are well worth taking advantage of.
You mentioned Blurb, and I just want to remind all our members, and I'll share my screen here. Of course, if you're an ASMP or NAMPA member, you have access to the Member Benefit Hub, and Blurb is a recent corporate member. All of these, by the way, are pages where you can go and find discounts and really cool things just for membership. But Blurb is one of our corporate members as well, and so if you're logged in, you'll see a discount code up here to get some significant discounts on Blurb products and books. Go and visit that if you're a member, because definitely that's a good thing to take advantage of. So we have a question that came in about fine art,
Mhm.
and I'll just read it instead of trying to paraphrase it. Regarding curating and sequencing, any specific thoughts on how to curate and connect so images work together, like strongest first and last, or have a consistent color palette, or don't combine vertical and horizontal? How do you think about storytelling and image sequencing, and what do you look for when you're looking at a book?
Yeah. I think that color is a huge part of an an incredible tool you have when you're putting work together and lighting, like so sequencing images where certain lighting styles flow together and color palettes. It becomes very difficult to put in a sequence, very jarring if you're sort of putting direct flash, very contrasty work next to very soft organic work. Not to say it can't be done, but you've created a much harder job for yourself. So A great place to start is to sort of think about to the question, like, so where to begin, where to end, right? And it depends, I think it depends on, again, what's important to you here? Is this something that's chronological? Does it need to kind of move maybe from like morning through the day to the end of the day? Is it, someone growing older, like, or is it just this is my strongest image? Often I'm working on website edits for photographers, which again, like a landing page overview is very similar to this process of like a book edit, portfolio edit. So often I think it's really important to front load a sequence with your absolute strongest, attention getting images. The first, I always refer to it as kind of like a thesis statement, right? So you want the first 3, 4, 5 images to sort of really get the viewer sort of locked into the style, the orientation, the personality of your work. And from there, so make a strong statement with some of your strongest work that you think is really a great representation of your style and your sort of point of view as a photographer. And then build an edit from there, using color, using lighting, using composition to guide. I think in terms of like little vignettes almost, you can make little groupings of images that fit together and then, move those around so that until you get a nice cohesive flow throughout the entire series.
And putting your work together in that way shows a level of maturity and understanding about your work, right? It's not just these are my best images all slapped together. It's that you are starting to understand how your work interacts with other parts of your work, right?
Absolutely, and I think it takes a certain level of detachment. Like I said, I think photographers sometimes get very attached to certain images for whatever reason, and it doesn't necessarily mean that those are the images that serve them best in terms of communicating their work to others. Or sometimes I see photographers often having like negative feelings about work because they didn't have a good time making it, but it might be very strong, but they had a client that was gave them a hard time or, some complication that makes them have a certain emotional relationship to those images. So again, this is part of what you get from these reviews is someone who can be more objective about your work than you are. Because I mean, that's just really difficult, right? To not have all those associations and feelings about your own work. I think it takes a lot of, yeah, discipline and effort and time and experience to kind of get to a point where you can step back. So, a really helpful tool is hearing other people's feedback.
Well, I want to echo one point you said in a different context, and that is putting your strongest work towards the top. In the legal side, when we write briefs, we know that we could write a 50-page brief and judges might read the first page or two. You want
Mhm.
to get those points in there early. That's what a lot of times people will remember or think about after the fact, that first introduction they have to you, which I think is valuable. We have another comment here that says, for this photographer, everything changed when they focused on just one project. Sometimes they have a second
Mhm.
project on hand to show different scope,
Mhm.
but you only have a limited amount of time. Can you talk a little bit more about interesting questions that photographers may have asked you when you were doing reviews, or insightful questions that might be a little past the what can I do better,
Mhm.
kind of questions, things that made you think about their work in a different way?
I think that when a photographer, I'm trying to think if I can put it in terms of a question, but generally speaking, when they come prepared to speak about why they're making this work at all, that some question that sort of gets at them having some sort of creative reason that they're making this work beyond here's a series of pictures, are they good or not? A question in general, I feel like that's why I think the best conversations I've had have been about personal work where someone has quite a lot to say about the photography, but also about their relationship to the photography and the subject and the images. Although I think photographers do need to be careful. I'll try and think of some good specific questions because I think that is important. But I did want to make sure that I say that photographers also remember to listen because, I think sometimes photographers have so much to say and are quite passionate about what they're sharing, and that's amazing. But then again, that 20 minutes can go by so quickly. So just kind of creating space in the conversation as make statements about your work or ask a question, and then giving the reviewer time to respond in that sort of conversational dialogue back and forth. I did want to make sure that's one experience I've had often, unfortunately, that all the important sort of conversation gets pushed to the end, and then you get spat back out into your breakout rooms like it's all over.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a balance to be had between talking about your creative vision and then only talking about your creative vision, and then time's up and you don't
Yeah.
get to the actual work. But, I think for a lot of photographers that we talk to, i- they either sink themselves into kind of the why that of what they're doing, and then you have photographers on the other end of the spectrum that just kind of divorce themselves from everything and say, here's the work, you tell me about the work. And it seems like the most effective route may be somewhere in the middle there. Is that right?
I think so. I think the best conversations I ever have about photography sort of they get to the why, but not at the expense of talking about the actual visual vocabulary, the fundamentals. Like I think the fundamentals always matter, but that sort of getting at the creative drive that got this whole thing. Like, it's not an easy thing to do to be a photographer. Not an easy thing at all. It's sort of a hard job. And if you're newer to the industry, but it's so meaningful, and I think anyone who can be a photographer professionally, you're lucky to be able to do so. So, what is that creative drive that's specific to this project? Let's say we're looking at a project, but also, yeah, not at the expense of like, is this effective? It's a way of communicating. Like, all right, you might have something that's really important for you to say, and you maybe are or are not e- effectively communicating that in the images, and that might or might not be about the sequence. It might be about something about the approach you've taken.
Sure. Sure. Let me ask this, and we are coming to the end of the time that we asked from you, Honor. So thank you so much for your time here
Sure.
today. And I think Honor can stick around for a little bit for some additional questions. If you have questions, stick those in the Q&A box, or send them directly in the chat. We appreciate the questions that have come in so far. There's an important piece to this that we haven't talked about at all, and that's the follow-up and kind of the
Hmm.
aftermath of a review. As a reviewer, certainly, not only now, but back at the New Yorker and elsewhere, what made you what made a photographer stick out when it came to the reviews over, you've seen 20 people, 50 people that day, and then the photographer reaches out to you in some method? What's most effective there?
A really short but thoughtful email, direct email. Like usually you'll get emails for all your reviewers, and then they can follow up from there with connecting on like LinkedIn, Instagram, all that sort of thing. But I think just a quick, thoughtful kind of thank you, or, here's another project. The best sort of follow ups I've had are when we've actually had a real conversation about the photography, and then there's something else that photographer wants to share. Maybe it's sending a link to another project, or if we were looking at a specific body of work, maybe it's just following up with the website, or something that sort of complements the conversation we had and the work that we did see.
And have you been the recipient of a thank you email that was addressed to someone else? I feel like
Oh
that comes up a lot.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
write thoughtful emails. It doesn't take long to
Yeah.
have a sentence or two that lets the reviewer know, that you are listening, right? This, as Honor said, these are relationship building exercises, and the more thoughtful you can be, the better those relationships will be. Honor, have you personally ever not known a photographer, did a portfolio review, saw their work, and then hired them for a job after the fact to have photographers who stood out in that way?
No, but I have known it to happen. But more often than not, I feel like it's kind of like brought people into my orbit or into colleagues' orbit. Like you kind of have photographers who kind of get on your radar sometimes.
Yeah.
Often, maybe relationship building, it leads to a follow up correspondence or an in person meeting, but it's often just a really nice way to have a real connection with someone that you can then build on.
Well, speaking of something like that, we just had a question that came in, which is appropriate for this and other settings. If you're doing an online portfolio review, is it appropriate or acceptable to ask the reviewer if you can record it?
Yeah, I mean, I would think so, but yes, you should absolutely ask. And if they don't feel comfortable, that seems like these days, I think it's important to make sure you're asking permission if you want to record, obviously, but plenty of people may not feel comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Like just
Yeah.
be prepared for that.
I think that's a great question, and we want to express how thankful you spend well more, almost an hour with us talking about portfolio reviews. Any final thoughts you have about what a photographer can do today to make their next portfolio review great? What are the most important things? We talked about a ton of different elements.
I think having an elevator pitch, though that's not the images, it's what you're going to say, it's always a great place to start with any sort of, if it's something you haven't done, as like an exercise to articulate again who you are and what is your work about, right? And let that sort of guide your editing approach to make sure that what you're saying about yourself is backed up by the work you're sharing and the way you're presenting your work. It should all feel cohesive. It should all
Yeah.
feel like you're expressing with one voice what you're saying and what you're sharing visually.
Right. Yeah. I want to end on a piece that we talked about, which is this is relationship building, and right now you all have had an experience where you've gotten to listen to Honor speak, and you should reach out to her and you should send an email. I can't tell you the number of talks that I give to hundreds of people, and maybe there's one or two people who reach out. I end up hiring some of those people for things in the past. These are relationships, and this is an opportunity to reach out. So Honor, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for being here today and answering all these questions. And we will talk to you again soon. And thanks to Wonderful Machine for everything they do as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having us and thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are going to stick around if there are some other questions about anything else. I am not a portfolio review expert. We can talk about business, legal, industry advocacy. I know it is a quasi holiday week. It's very quiet here and in downtown. So if there are any immediate questions, we certainly answer those. And if not, but for we put up the recording, and certainly please watch the other ones, especially the one we did last week or a couple weeks ago on independent contractors and employees, and keep an eye on the advocacy efforts. Right, we have a lot going on. The next time we talk, we might have a different register of copyrights, which would be something else based on those Supreme Court cases, and we'll give you some updates on the Sedlik matter and some of the other things we're doing with the U.S. Copyright Office. So as always, we really appreciate you all being here today and being members. If you are members, if you're not members, we would love to have you be a member. We get to do things like this with the membership regularly, and we really appreciate it. So thank you again. Thank you, Honor. Thank you, everyone. And we will talk soon, okay?
Thank you.
And